Joining us now is Lieutenant General Mark Hertling, retired commander of U.S. Army Europe. Also with us, nuclear policy and national security expert Joe Cirincione. He's a member of the Council on Foreign Relations and a former advisor to the State Department. Good to have you both here. General Hertling, what do you make of Iran's response so far and their ability to get through the Iron Dome in some places?
Well, truthfully, Anna, it's been fascinating to me. I did not think Iran would have this kind of capability after the initial strike, and the fact that Israel has destroyed most of their air defense, Iranian air defense systems, as well as their air force, as well as decapitating most of their military leadership. So you're talking about more of a response than what I would have expected. And truthfully, the amount and waves of missiles that Iran is throwing at Israel, specifically Tel Aviv, have the capacity to break through. And here's what I mean by that. The Iron Dome, David Sling, all the air defense systems that Israel have are very capable. And when you talk about their capability, it's usually somewhere between 90 to 98% strikes and hit and defensive capability against any incoming ballistic missile. The problem is when you have waves of hundreds of missiles coming in, some of them will break through, and that's what we're seeing happening. If Iran actually synchronizes their attack, much like they tried to do last April 2024, they would be able to get quite a few missiles through into the population centers of Israel, and that could be devastating. So I'm watching this very closely, surprised at Iran's capability, even though Israel seems to have gained the upper hand. Iran is fighting back with what they have to fight back with.
And Joe, let's talk about the heart of the matter here, why Israel says it is going after Iran in this way. Shortly before Israel launched the strikes, the International Atomic Energy Agency said Iran was in breach of its non-proliferation obligations. It was the first time they had made that assessment in about 20 years. Iran now has said it has no intention of developing nuclear weapons, but has the right to use nuclear energy and research. Given what you know, what is Iran's nuclear capabilities at this point, and how much damage has Israel inflicted?
Well, Iran has the capability to produce enough uranium for the core of about 10 nuclear bombs in a matter of weeks, maybe as few as 10 days. It would then have to construct these nuclear devices, which will take months. The official U.S. intelligence estimate is at least a year, although that could be sped up. What Israel had tried to do initially is hit some of those nuclear facilities, and you saw damage to the above ground, the soft parts of those agreements, electrical substations, any facilities that are above ground, but it's unable on its own to get at the deeply buried centrifuges. So you run the risk that Iran could decide to just throw caution to the wind and do an all-out sprint to a bomb. That is what many of us have warned about for years. You attack Iran, you're not going to be able to knock out the nuclear facilities, and you may just encourage Iran to then go all out for a bomb, and you won't be able to stop them. That explains why Netanyahu has broadened the target set. You can see in recent days, it's civilian structures, political infrastructure, economic infrastructure. That indicates a regime change strategy, not something to stop the nuclear program, but something to overthrow the regime. I think that is beyond Israel's capability, and that's what risks having this war go on for weeks and the risk of spreading to a regional conflict.
I do want to ask more about the regime change angle in just a second, but Joe, sticking with your expertise when it comes to the nuclear capabilities of Iran and these facilities that have already taken multiple hits, Israel officials are saying they're not going to stop until Iran's nuclear program is dismantled, whether that happens diplomatically with some kind of agreement or militarily. If these sites keep taking on these types of strikes, what is the risk when it comes to the dangers of what's inside these facilities now, being exposed to the general population?
Well, the IAE, the International Atomic Energy Agency, just issued a report this morning assessing the damage, and they talked about the above-ground facilities being damaged, and the risk is not really a radioactive risk. The uranium hexafluoride, the uranium gas that spins in the centrifuges, is slightly radioactive, but you have to ingest it, basically, to be hurt by it. It's more of a chemical risk. Think of it as a highly corrosive chemical that could risk, and the IAE confirms this. So you don't have that kind of risk. Would have a risk if Israel was to hit the reactor at Bashir. That would be a reactor breach, would be highly radioactive. Or if Iran were to hit the Dimona research reactor in Israel, again, that would be a massive release of radioactive gases and perhaps fluids. That would cause a risk. But no, we're not worried about a nuclear explosion. We're not worried about a Chernobyl or Fukushima type disaster at this point.
So, General, we learned President Trump rejected a plan from Israel to try to assassinate Iran's supreme leader. This is according to 2 U.S. officials. So when we talk about this aspect of potential regime change, what are the calculations behind a decision like that?
Well, it gets to what Joe just said, Anna. You know, it has to do with what is Israel's strategy? Is it to conduct regime change, which requires a different approach, or does it consist of primarily eliminating their nuclear capability? If you say it's their nuclear capability, that's the end state. Israel by themselves does not have the ends, well, that's the end state, but they don't have the ways and means to do this. Those ends, ways, and means are all part of strategy. The same thing is true of regime change. What we've seen in other nations, in fact, the U.S. has been involved in attempted regime change. You'll see that that causes a lot of chaos within a nation. And I haven't heard anyone say this yet, but Iran is a country about 4 times the size of Iraq, and it has 89 million people, about half of them being women, obviously. So when you're talking about the dynamics between the extreme right, the people who are running the extremist part of the government versus the moderates, it would be very difficult to come to a conclusion 50-50 on who takes over. So when you talk about regime change or the deal that happens afterwards and bringing peace, who's bringing that peace about? Is it the extremists or is it the moderates? And are you going after nuclear weapons or are you trying to change the government? That's when these kind of conflicts get very confusing. And I don't think Israel has considered all those things when they've seen an opportunity to go in and attack Iran because it has been weakened by the last 2 years of fighting.
General, the White House is warning Iran to avoid retaliation against American forces specifically. The Trump administration has been sort of walking this fine line in terms of U.S. involvement. We're now learning that prior to Israel's strikes, the Joint Chiefs chairman briefed the president and his national security team on 3 potential options. Those options, according to 3 sources, included logistical support like refueling Israeli jet fighters, sharing intelligence, using the American military's electronic warfare capabilities to try to help Israel jam enemy weapons and communications. Another option was to provide direct military support to Israel, even having U.S. jets drop munitions in active combat alongside Israeli fighters, for example. And yet another option, Kane briefed Trump, was to do nothing at all. General, now that these attacks are ongoing, what do you see as the U.S. role?
Well, and if these bullet points are in fact correct, Anna, what I would suggest is 2 of them are defensive in action to try and help an ally, which is what we did the last time Israel was attacked by multiple rounds of missiles coming into their territory. 2 of them are offensive in nature. We have then become part of this conflict, not only conducting strikes, but also giving fuel and the capability of intelligence for Israel to continue their fight. So Iran has, truthfully, a say in this. They are the enemy. They're the ones being attacked. So if it is purely a defensive measure, which is what we did the last time Israel was being attacked, then that's what allies do for each other. They help each other out. But when we get involved in offensive actions, it's a whole different story. And that's where I think the Trump administration is treading very lightly.